My name's Matthew Wadsworth. I'm a lutenist, and in this project I am the Theorbo soloist in a new concerto that's been written for me by composer Stephen Goss. I started playing guitar when I was 6, classical guitar, and then I also took up electric guitar a few years later, which was a great thing to do. I learned to improvise, and I used to go to the library and get loads of vinyl records of Beatles and Rolling Stones and take them home and work out all the chord patterns and the solos. And funnily enough, it's helped me so much in my role as a continuo player. Then I went back to classical guitar, and when I went to the Royal Academy, it was at the end of my first year, a friend of mine asked if I would come and play the Theorbo in a production of Venus and Adonis. And I said, well, why not? The Academy's got a Theorbo. So I got this crazy long, it's 2 meters long and 14 strings. So a different beast to the guitar, and I kind of wrestled with it, and the pegs kept jumping out, and I didn't know how to tune it. And after a week, I phoned him up. I said, I just can't do this. It's a nightmare. And he said, look, don't give up. Just come and play one number from the opera. Just one thing. So I did it, and actually, I played 4 or 5 numbers, and I loved the experience of really playing music with other people and being part of the texture. Guitars are, it's a relatively solitary instrument. So this was a whole new experience. And then just by chance I got asked to do something else, and then something else, and I thought, wait a minute, this could just open up so many doors. My life could be so different. So I agonized over it, and the main thing for me to grapple with was to get rid of my fingernails, which sounds trivial, but when you've spent most of your life kind of polishing and looking after these things that are your sound on the guitar, to contemplate chopping them off, it's a bit like cutting one of your hands off. They do grow back, so it's not that bad, but it was a big deal. And then I just decided I'll go for it. I'd reached a fork in the road, and I took the kind of more difficult, risky path, which I seem to have done many times. And it just worked out so well. I learned with Nigel North. I was very lucky to be able to get him as a teacher at the Academy. And I developed a system of braille lute tablature, which we'll talk about later. So there were things to do. I had to solve problems before I could really start playing the lute. But yeah, it was really the music that drew me to the instrument, and playing music with other people as well as solo. So in an ensemble, the Theorbo is very much a continuo instrument. So just to explain what that is, at the beginning of the 17th century, musical instruments were really divided up into 2 families, the bass instruments and the treble. So the treble were things like the violin, the recorder, the voice, cornetto. And the bass instruments were the lute and the theorbo, the viola da gamba, dulcian, harpsichord. So in a Baroque piece, the theorbo is part of the continuo group, where we provide the harmony and the backbone of the piece, and an element of improvisation around a chord structure. So on the kind of other end of the scale, the lute and the theorbo have a big solo repertoire. So you can do plenty of playing on your own, or you can play with singers. So this is the Theorbo, or its Italian name is the chitarrone, and it's really a big lute. It was developed in Italy at the end of the 16th century, in a time when they needed an instrument with a kind of stronger presence and a stronger bass range. So it has 14 strings. There are 8 strings that go down or up in a diatonic scale, and they sound like this. They run the whole length of the instrument, 160 centimetre string length, and they're really there to kind of reinforce a chord. So if I play, and then there are 6 strings, short strings, relatively short, 85 centimetre string length, and they work a bit like a guitar in that you put your fingers on the frets and that changes the notes. But they have a slightly strange tuning. They sound like this. That's called re-entrant tuning. You'll hear that the top 2 strings suddenly go an octave lower. And that is what is unique about the Theorbo, this re-entrant tuning. It's because the string length is so long that if you tried to tune the gut string up there, they would break. So they're very practical, put them down an octave. So it means with this instrument that you can do lots of what we call campanella, which is playing notes and scales across the strings rather than up and down the fingerboard. And often you get chords where the notes just sound like they're in the wrong order. So you get these wonderful dissonances. So the primary use for the Theorbo in an ensemble or in an orchestra is as a continuo instrument, part of the continuo group. So perhaps with the harpsichord and the cello or viola da gamba. And that's where we are harmonizing the bass line. So if I play you something like that's a La Folia bass line. So I'm playing the chords, but I also have the liberty to embellish. So it's a lovely sound, and that was really what drew me to this instrument. We also have solo pieces where the real idiom of the Theorbo comes through with this strange tuning, so I'll give you a little example. So people often ask me how I actually go about learning music. You know, how do I get it from the printed page into my brain? And so there are a number of different ways. I learn from Braille music, and also I do a lot by ear. I have both skill sets, and so with something like this, Steve has written the piece in Sibelius, and there's a format now called Music XML, and you can go from Music XML into Braille. So that's really a wonderful thing to be able to do. You don't always get all the information, like all the fingerings. So then what we do, once I've had a good look at the music, I get together with Steve over Skype, and we just go over it. And because the way the Theorbo is tuned, there are many ways that you can kind of play the same passage. So I try and understand what it is that he wants, and have I missed something, or have I come up with something different? And it's a process that's evolved, and it works incredibly well. It's very efficient. And I also have with a piece like this, it's never been recorded, so I have a MIDI, audio MIDI file as well, which has just helped me learn the cues and when to come in and how the orchestra sounds. It's been invaluable because some of it's really quite tricky. So it's a different process, I think, to what other people do, but ultimately it's the same results, just a different way of doing it. And I'm grateful that we live in this time of wonderful technology where you can just make stuff happen. In 2014, I was asked to play in a concert series at the Sam Wanamaker Theatre at the Globe. It was a concert series that guitarist John Williams was running. And I did the first half solo, and the second half there was a piece by a composer called Stephen Goss, Flower of Cities, and that was for 2 guitars, violin, double bass and percussion. And John Williams had asked that I be involved, even though the piece had been written. So Steve Goss, he wrote me a passage to play, and also I improvised at various points. And John Williams said, well, look, we really should have a solo Theorbo piece by Goss. And so he commissioned a piece called The Miller's Tale. And it just went down really well. It's a great piece. It's on my Late Night Lute album, and I've played it many times in public, and the feedback is positive. At least no one's thrown anything at me yet, so I think it's all right. And I'd really got to know Steve's music, and especially some of his concerti, and I thought, I bet he could do it. He could do something that's not been done before for the 17th century Theorbo, which is to bring it into the foreground. So we hatched a plan, and obviously we needed to get funding to make it happen, and also some concerts. And then the wheels just started turning, and then the Academy of Performing Arts in Hong Kong got involved, and they funded half of the piece. And the North York Moors Chamber Music Festival came on board. It's run by cellist Jamie Walton. They funded the other half of the piece via Arts Council England. And then I got an award from the Elizabeth Eaglebot Memorial Fund, which is run by the RNIB. So that was to fund the recording of the piece. So it was a lot of hard work. It didn't just kind of fall into place. It was really a year of just writing to people and talking about it. But it was fairly quick that we knew we could go ahead. The question is, how do you start something like this? The concerto hasn't been written before for the 17th century Theorbo. So what form would it take? What might be some of the influences, or they're all big questions. And one thing I was keen for Steve to do is to write a piece where the Theorbo could be showcased as a solo instrument, but also as an accompanying instrument, which is its normal role in an orchestra. And I think the concerto vehicle can be a slightly antisocial one, where the soloist turns up, kind of works against the orchestra for an hour, and then goes to the dressing room and plays the piece and then goes home, and it's all a bit kind of cold. And I wanted something that was a much more collaborative experience. And I really think Steve Goss has done that. So there were 3 interludes in the piece. They're all for Theorbo and double bass as the accompanying instruments, and then the first interlude is for violin, second is for cello, and the third is for viola. And the interludes are interspersed between the 4 main movements of the piece. And the main movements are kind of solo and tutti. So it's a whole mixture of different styles, different genres, different ways of using the instrument. In the Passacaglia, for instance, I use a plectrum to really help make a sustained line. And we tried, Steve wanted me to use a bottleneck as well for some slides, and I just couldn't make it sound good. I've really got the action on the Theorbo, which is the height of the strings above the fingerboard. I've got it super low, and it just, I don't know, I couldn't do it. Maybe someone else could, but I'm kind of approximating the sound of the slides of a bottleneck. But he's really challenged me, and actually I've never had to practice something so hard. It's really quite difficult in places, but not stupid. It's beautifully written, but there's not a single chord in the piece that I've ever played before. So just to get my head around that, and some of the rhythms as well and the way they look. There's a section in the piece called Neo Soul, which is it's very kind of funk based, and I don't recall ever playing funk in Dal and Lacrimae. So there's been lots of new styles to get used to and get my head around, and so it's been a wonderful challenge, and it still is. I'm still working at it. Now, the way that it changes the playing style, it's very interesting. Obviously, it's a relatively quiet instrument, so it is amplified. I've got a really, really good amplification system, and so what it enables me to do is be completely myself. Now, when you play continuo in an orchestra, you're often just trying to play as loud as you can, or make some of the sound cut through, and you're very much part of the texture and the colour. So this, there are chamber music sections to the piece, but there are also many kind of solo passages. And with the amplification, it's just like having a massive Theorbo. And so I can play very lightly. I can really touch the instrument lightly, and the sound is there. And to be honest, I'm still getting used to that and getting better at it. It's a bit like a singer having a kind of mic technique. I'm developing it, but I'm actually really enjoying it. So, in the concerto, obviously the instrument is used in a very different way, and Steve Goss has used the idiom of the instrument to develop some of the musical material. So certain chord shapes or things that we do across the strings. Let's see, in the last movement, for instance, there's a kind of bluesy, boogie-woogie bass line going on, and in my part we get something like this. And it's just really lovely to play that. That's open string, and then going on to the 3rd fret, and then open 4th string, so you're just hammering on and off the strings. And then he does lots of things where so he's really using the campanella effect of the instrument, where you're going across the strings rather than trying to play that scale up and down. And then there's this wonderful bit, kind of neo-soul section in the scherzo, where he uses the bass strings in a very different way. Normally we only play these strings with the right hand, and nearly always with the thumb, but I'm actually having to use my fingers because it moves so fast. So we've got something that sounds like this. So that's a very different use of the instrument. And then this was really something I had to get used to. So in the Passacaglia, there's a sustained line that I have to play, and of course there are almost no instruments that sustain less than the Theorbo. It really doesn't sustain much at all. So I use a plectrum, and I tried many plectrums to get the sound that I want. And I settled on a Gibson Heavy, and it sounds like this. Goes on like that. So again, it's not something you'd ever find in Baroque music, but I think it's more like a kind of ukulele technique. But I think it works really very effectively, especially with what's going on in the orchestra. The orchestration of the piece is strings only, and I think that works very, very well with this instrument. I don't know how it would be with winds, but we decided anyway we'd start with concerto for strings and Theorbo. And then there are these three interludes where I really have very much an accompanying role. So the first one, my part sounds like this. Over the top of that is the violin doing a solo, and it's me and the double bass accompanying. So it's really full of all sorts of different textures. The last movement's got this very rhythmical beginning. Again, it's like nothing else I've ever had to try and play. So it's been a lot of work to learn all these new shapes and new language. But once it's in your fingers, it's so wonderfully idiomatic. It's just completely different to anything from the 17th century, which is my normal language. So I feel like I've had to kind of very quickly learn how to speak Portuguese fluently. I'm getting and I made a list of orchestras who I felt would be appropriate for the piece, and absolutely top of the list was the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. Been quite a few times up to Edinburgh to play with the group, and I just feel so comfortable with them. They're a great band, really nice people. And I think it was meant to be, because really within a day, Judith had written back and said, well, look, actually this is a perfect fit. So the leader of the SCO, Ben Gilmore, is a former student of Steve Goss. So there's a really strong connection there. So I hope you've enjoyed this little introduction to the world of the Theorbo and the first Theorbo Concerto for the 17th century instrument. And thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.